for 20 of the labs, essentially no one doing any work. So they weren't part of the percentage. Potentially, if all those people got up and started working, we could really swing the stats the other way. So what I really want to say is Cal OSHA will be coming to UCR and will be doing audits of our labs. And if they find people not wearing PPE, their coats, and their eyewear, that will be a big problem for the program, the students, and of course, the purpose is to make everyone safe. So I'll let Russ do the introduction.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for letting us impose upon you in this time slot. It was very nice of you to let me impose here. I wanted to bring Craig Merlic to talk to you to give you some first-hand accounts of what it was like to be at UCLA, the chair of the safety committee in chemistry at the time when Sherry Sanji died. And to give you a little background of Craig, he got his bachelor's from UC Davis, a doctorate, PhD from University of Wisconsin-Madison, did a postdoc at Princeton University. He joined the faculty at UCLA in '89. He was the vice chair of the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry for 2 stints. He suffered for, looks like, about 7 years or so doing that job. Among other awards, he's gotten the National Science Foundation Young Investigator Award, the Camille Dreyfus Teacher Scholar Award, and the Alfred B. Sloan Research Fellowship. His research is generally in transition metal organometallic chemistry and organic synthesis. He's done everything from just classic catalysis to developing chemotherapeutic agents. And when I looked up his publication list, he's got over 70 publications in more than 24 separate journals, most of which are currently out of JACS, the Global American Chemical Society, with more than 15 publications there, 9 out of TETLET, 7 from JO or Chem, and on and on. In addition to the journal articles, he's gotten portions of 2 books and done a web conference. So he's quite well-rounded and very active in the real world, in addition to being the director of the UC Center for Laboratory Safety and actively involved, principally the product owner of the Laboratory Hazard Assessment Tool. So he took a paper-based tool that was at UCLA, helped the folks at UC Davis who wrote the software, developing the LHAT that we all use today. So if you like it, tell them you like it. If you don't like it, this is a guide for you. So with that, let me have Craig.
Right. Thank you very much for the introduction.
You bet.
For those students who are not participating in lab work, so I need to draw on his comments. And so I got a question for you. How many grad students does it take to screw in a light bulb? One, but it takes them 7 years. Okay, so let's talk about, I'd like to talk to you today about some safety programs. And so just starting off with, I'm at UCLA and I'm the director of the UC Center for Laboratory Safety, which is a system-wide center, but our goal is to try and develop new safety in laboratories. And so we actually do research on safety practices. But let's just start off, and this is some labs from a number of years ago. And so you can see rather disheveled labs. Maybe the PI had an interest in fire. The lab worker, maybe not so much. But rather disheveled labs. And then things got a little better when they invented the hood. And so here you can see the hood, but the lab is still rather disheveled, kind of messy. I'm not quite sure about the flying animal, not what's going on there. But anyway, look at that hood, and here's another hood over here. Then about 100 years ago, things got a little cleaner, neater, maybe not so diverse, but they, labs like this. And then fast forward to the present, and so here is sort of a modern, state-of-the-art lab, shiny new hoods, very excited grad students. You can see he's wearing all the appropriate PPE, gloves, safety glasses, t-shirt, and jeans. And unfortunately, all of that changed in 2008. So on December 29th, 2008, which was 29 days after I became chair of the safety committee, this fine woman, Sherry Sanji, had an accident. She was doing this chemistry here using this bottle of tertiary butyl lithium and this fume hood and using this syringe here when a terrible accident occurred. So she was using a large syringe to transfer a sizable volume of tertiary butyl lithium. Tertiary butyl lithium is an extremely pyrophoric chemical. As soon as it touches air, it bursts into flames. So she was using the syringe. She was drawing it like you would normally draw a syringe if you look at my hand. She was pulling it like this. But a large syringe is hard. There's a lot of friction, but also as it gets nearer the end, the friction actually goes down, so you have less friction. Also, if you notice, the needle is too short and too small a diameter. It's a 22 gauge needle rather than a 16 gauge needle. She pulled the plunger out. When she pulled the plunger out, 25 milliliters of tertiary butyl lithium was exposed to the air, created a large fireball. The fireball ignited her synthetic shirt. She was not wearing cotton, it was a synthetic shirt. She was not wearing a laboratory coat. Her clothes caught on fire. She sustained burns, third-degree burns, about 50% of her body. She unfortunately did not go to the shower, the safety shower, and it turns out that they got the flames out pretty quickly, but she didn't go in the shower. And it turns out that your body responds to heat in a number of ways, and even when the flames are out, you should still go in the shower or underwater and basically cool the skin down, but she unfortunately did not. There were 2 postdocs in the lab that helped her out, but they didn't put her in the safety shower. So they called the paramedics. They came, took her to the hospital. She was sent to the burn unit, and unfortunately, 18 days later, she died from her burns. So, very tragic accident. So, since that time, many things have changed, and I would like to dedicate this talk and most of my talks to her memory. But thinking about what's happened at UCLA, but also the UC system, is shown here. So the accident was December of '08. She died 18 days later. And then Cal OSHA investigated UCLA. As your chair mentioned, you also had an investigation recently. And one of the things that really grabbed people's attention was the Los Angeles District Attorney filed felony charges against the professor and the UC Regents in December of '11, so 3 years after the accident. And never before had a professor been charged with felony charges for an injury to a student. In fact, that was the basis of the legal issues for this case, because there was no legal precedent that you could charge a professor for these violations. Now, it turns out you can't put a university in jail. So 6 months after the felony charges were filed against the university settled with the district attorney. And so there was an agreement called the settlement agreement. And so UCLA Department of Chemistry and all chemistry departments in the UC system are operating under the settlement agreement, where they have to do a number of things. The good news is that the settlement agreement largely is things that we should be doing anyway. And we should have been doing better before the accident. But now we're encouraged to do it more clearly. One of the ways they're encouraged to do it is that the chancellor of every university has to sign a piece of paper twice a year and send it to the district attorney saying, I certify that my campus is in full compliance with the settlement agreement. So that certainly gets the chancellor's attention when he or she has to sign that off and send it to the district attorney. The professor and the lawyers argued for a few more years, and my immediate colleague, so full disclosure, he is my friend. There's 12 organic chemists at UCLA, so we work together, so I know him. So he signed a settlement agreement that deferred prosecution. So you'll see some misinformation in the media. It turns out he never went to trial, so there never was a decision if a professor could be charged with a felony charge. So that was never settled, and it was taken out of court. And in CNE News, they said professor avoids jail by signing an agreement. That's not correct either. It was just an agreement to avoid going to trial, but there was no agreement to avoid going to jail. But independent of those legal issues, the main thing is shown here in red. So we've had changes in safety practices at all levels of the campus since January of 2009. So I want to talk to you today about some of those things and things that you can think about doing here, or maybe you can give me feedback on things you're doing better than what we're doing. So the accident has had a huge aftermath, not only at UCLA, but also across the whole University of California system. but also chemistry departments in universities nationwide. I've actually traveled to many chemistry departments to give seminars in many other states, and there's a lot of interest in improving safety in our chemistry laboratories and other research laboratories. The federal agencies have been involved, and also the professional societies. So this has been a very tragic accident that has true impact improving academic safety practices and the culture of safety. And Sherry was not the first person to die in an academic laboratory, but this one has truly been transformative. And so that's a good thing. At least there's some outcome coming out of this. I also want to credit the family. The family never sued the professor or the university, so there's no legal action taken. They just wanted to make sure that changes were made to improve laboratory safety. So I really respect the family for that. So looking at outside organizations, we all know about the Transportation Safety Board because they investigate airplane accidents and things like that. There's also an equivalent board, the Chemical Safety Board, and they had never investigated a chemistry accident in an academic institution. They did not investigate the UCLA accident, but it turns out 2 years later, or actually just a little over a year later, there was an accident at Texas Tech University. A graduate student was working on explosives. They knew they were working with explosives, and the student decided to scale up the procedure. Scaled up the procedure and then isolated the crystalline solid, and was scraping it with a spatula when it detonated, and it took off 3 fingers of the grad student's hand and suffered other bodily injuries. So the Chemical Safety Board, which is a federal organization, investigated that accident, and they issued a report making recommendations for changes not only at Texas Tech, but academic institutions across the United States. The American Chemical Society has been active. So they have 2 different reports here, creating safety cultures in academic institutions and also advancing graduate education. And so this second one here is talking about graduate education, and they specifically said that graduate education is missing something if it does not include safety training. People are going to go out and go to industry, other organizations. They need to be trained from the get-go on proper laboratory safety practices. And then finally, I just want to highlight that the National Academy of Sciences, National Research Council also put out a report last year, 2014, called Safe Science, Promoting a Culture of Safety in Academic Chemical Research. But actually, you could cross out the word chemical, and it was a pretty broad report in terms of the recommendations. Now, the report itself is about 120 pages, so I doubt anyone can read it here. But I do recommend looking at it because there's 5 executive summaries. One executive summary is what the chancellor of the university should be doing to promote safety in the institution. Another one is what deans, directors, vice chancellors at that level, what they should be doing to promote laboratory safety. Another one is for faculty, PIs, what they should be doing to promote safe practices in their research labs. The 4th executive summary is for EH&S, recommendations for EH&S directors, what they should be doing. And then the 5th executive summary, and all these executive summaries are about 2 pages long, is for students, for grad students and postdocs, what you should be doing to make sure that you have a safe environment. You want not only to get a PhD and a great letter of recommendation, but you want to leave UC Riverside with all your fingers, okay? And so the 5th executive summary talks about what you should look for in a PI, what you should demand from your PI, what you should demand from your labs so you have a safe career at in your graduate work or postdoctoral work. So I recommend taking a look at that. What I want to do here is just kind of summarize some key points that we'll talk about through the talk. And so in terms of institution-wide safety priorities, I write these 4 down. So one is the institution should make safety a priority. So it's important to do great research, right? Riverside wants to be a world-class research institution. You need to do it, but you also need to do it safely. Okay, so research should be safety should be a priority in your research. Another one is set expectations at every level. Faculty should expect their students operate in the lab in a certain way. Chairs of departments should expect that their faculty do certain things in terms of safety. The EH&S needs to have expectations on all the departments, the faculty, the students, of how things should be done in a safe manner. So it's very important that at the different levels that people set expectations of the way things should be done. There should be follow-through. So it's not enough to come in once a year and say, okay, are we safe? Okay, now we've got another 364 days to get through. You need to follow through on a regular basis. And then finally, you need to have sustainable efforts. And this is hard. It's one thing to have an event that crystallizes people's thinking, and changes things, but then you need to sustain that over time. You can't get lax. Okay? So you need to have policies and procedures in place that are ongoing to promote the safety in the institution. But I, in particular, want to highlight this one here, setting expectations. So early on at UCLA, we established a PPE policy. The PPE policy is that no one's allowed to work in a lab, any lab, unless they have long pants and closed-toed shoes. Okay? And we had one faculty member arguing with the HE director, "You're crazy. I can't possibly expect my grad students to work in long pants." Really? You're the professor. You can't expect your students to work in long pants? All the rooms are air conditioned. Okay? You just set the expectations and people do it. And then same for the institution and the faculty. If there's an expectation on the faculty for them to do certain things, then they'll do it and everyone will rise to the occasion and then get on with the research and do it in a good manner. Okay, so what I want to do is we walk through a series of stories talking about how things changed at various levels. So the first slide then is on the University of California Office of the President, so UCOP. So they instituted a number of changes. They added more resources to the campuses. Hopefully you got some of those resources. I know you got lab coats. New safety policies. The PPE policy was actually written at UCLA, and then the one that was adopted by UC system was the one that was written at UCLA right after the accident. You've also had a system-wide PPE distribution. So just last year, people came to campus and brought lab coats and eyeglasses, things like that, and that was great. I know that a lot of faculty are very concerned about the cost of PPE. Is that a cost that can be put on the grant, or should the institution be providing it? And it's not through yet, but I can say that Ken Smith, who's the HNS director at the UCOP level, actually wants the UC system to provide it to all the research groups. So faculty, you have something to hope for. You might get something from UCOP. As far as the lab coats are distributed, that's great. It turns out there's going to be another distribution coming down the line, and I'm very excited about it. It turns out that I've been working with a company in South Carolina, and they have a fabulous new lab coat that's coming out. It turns out your standard lab coat, whether it's the white one, cotton, or the blue FR one, if you spill water on it, it goes right through. It wicks into the coat, right? So it's acid-based, carcinogens, biologics, it'll go right through, right? Current lab coats, if you spill ethanol, goes right through. DMSO goes right through. These new lab coats, it rolls right off. It doesn't wick at all. 100% impervious to those. But it's as soft as cotton, and it's as breathable as a cotton shirt. It's fabulous. And in terms of chemical resistivity, current lab coats that you have, if you spill nitric acid on it, it'll burn through it. If you spill piranha solution on it, 1.5 seconds it burns through. Piranha solution is 3-to-1 concentrated sulfuric acid and 70% hydrogen peroxide, a very corrosive material. The new lab coats, nothing happens. You can pour the piranha solution on and it sits there. So these new lab coats are going to be coming out next year, and this will be really fabulous for your protection because the coats will not be wicking in the chemicals to your body. Right? And they're soft as cotton is breathable. The UCLA response is the bulk of my talk. And so there have been changes from the chancellor level all the way down to grad students and undergraduate students. There's been a complete top-to-bottom series of changes. And that was what's needed, because you can't just have the chancellor saying, oh, safety is important. You can't just have the HNS saying, oh, safety is important. You can't have the students saying, well, we want to be safe in our work. It has to happen at every single level. So we'll try and talk about these things. So at the chancellor level, so here's our Chancellor Gene Block. He made safety a priority. He allocated resources, an extra $1 million to HNS. He also charged the Vice Chancellor for research with follow-through on laboratory safety. They also created a new position, so the Associate Vice Chancellor for research with a specific area of laboratory safety. So this new person coordinates on the faculty side laboratory safety. Different institutions have put HNS in different areas. So some institutions have HNS under facilities, along with fire department and police departments, and sometimes some institutions have it under research. And I'm not sure what it is here.
We're currently under the Business Administrative Services part of the Enterprise Risk Management.
Okay, so this is, and the same at UCLA. So by creating this new position, that helps coordinate the activities on the faculty side. So that was good. Another thing they did is we reorganized our committee structure. So it turns out that for many years there have been requirements for radiation safety, biological safety, laser safety, and so those are set in stone, but there's actually nothing in the area of chemical and physical safety. So what we did at UCLA is we created a new committee that's fully on par with the other committees, and we've charged it, and I happen to be the chair of that committee, with ensuring that this committee look at policies and procedures on campus that guarantee safe laboratory activities for chemical and safety hazards. We also look at policies on how things are done. I'll give you some examples in just a second. And then the chairs of these 5 committees, the 5 chairs and the director of EH&S sit on a safety oversight committee, and we report directly to the Vice Chancellor for research. So I think this is a good structure for the university because it provides lots of faculty input, because ultimately we're talking about requirements on faculty. We need to have the faculty do certain things the way they run their research labs, and they want to make sure that they have a voice. They want to make sure that they have input. So having this type of structure gives the faculty input in that area. So key point then is engaging and empowering faculty. My particular committee is the Chemical and Physical Safety Committee. We do a number of things. I won't bother reading the slide, but I'll give you some examples. So one question is, there are core facilities on campus. You might have an NMR core facility or a mass spec facility or a DNA synthesis facility or a light source facility. How do you guarantee the training of the students when you have students coming from many research groups into one core facility? Do you expect the manager of that core facility to be responsible for the safety training, or what can they do? And so we have policies in place like that. Another one is school groups all the time want to come visit labs. For some reason, labs are interesting, so they want to come into the lab. But what should you do to have a safe visit if people are going to come into your labs? Another example of a policy issue is that there's ideally visiting scientists from all over the world that come to your lab to do work. They might be there for a day, a week, a month, a year. How do you deal with their safety training? How do you certify it? Who's responsible? Okay? So my committee has looked at the policy issues so that we provide a safe environment and a structure to help the faculty manage their operation. Another thing UCLA did in the UC system was create the UC Center for Laboratory Safety, so I'm the executive director of that. In academic linguistics, the word center is a code word for an area or an institution that has research focus, and it's not different from the department because you can have different people, members of it, but it's a particular research focus. So we're interested in laboratory safety and developing new protocols. So we've done a number of activities. I will only tell you about one in a little bit, but we have as our mission then to sponsor and support research in laboratory safety and develop and translate that research into best practices for laboratories, and then facilitate the implementation and optimization of laboratory safety. So I'll point out that today, Jeanette, where's she? Where'd she go? Right over here. So you have an IT person here at UC Riverside, and she's actually working with the whole UC system on training modules related to laboratory safety. And she's just a fabulous researcher, she's an amazing person. So we're doing some work with her. Environment, health, and safety had a huge number of changes at UCLA. So we had an increased staff, increased frequency and scope of inspections, and various support things. They created initially at UCLA the LHAT tool, and then that was transformed into a UC-wide system through a project that I directed at UC Davis. But one of the things they really did was increase the technical expertise. So at UCLA, we have at least 6 laboratory inspectors that go around and inspect the labs and work with the PIs, work with the grad students and postdocs to make sure that the labs are operating in a safe manner, have safe systems set up. And it's important that you have a collaborative interaction. You can't have EH&S being the police in terms of safety. You want to have a collaborative interaction. But you can't have that unless people are knowledgeable. So what we've done is we've only hired PhD scientists. So the inspectors inspecting the biolabs have PhD degrees in microbiology. The inspectors inspecting the chemistry labs have PhD degrees in organic synthesis or inorganic synthesis, things like that. So real expertise that has helped out. Now one of the things that helped us out in terms of hiring PhD scientists is that the economy sucked over the last 6 years. So it's really easy to hire PhD scientists because there were no jobs available. All right. So one of the things EH&S did was ramp up safety training. So the accident occurred December of 08. And so you can see from December of 08 roughly 5,000-ish training classes. Now over 20,000. In fact, this has gone up in the last couple of years. So we're probably now about 25,000 training sessions offered by our EH&S. And so some of those are online in blue and some are in class in the reddish color. The starting class is Laboratory Safety Fundamentals, a broad-based course covering a wide variety of areas. And then there's specialized topics like dealing with waste, radiation safety, fire safety, a number of safety topics that AHS can cover for the whole university. But we also have additional training that I'll talk about in a little while. But AHS has been very involved in ramping that up. Another thing they did was create the LHAT, the Laboratory Hazard Assessment Tool. And this was based on something initially that was done at Iowa State University. But actually, I like to tell the story, and it goes back to 1994. So I was a grad student in 1984, and there was a silver recovery firm in Chicago, and they basically had a process where they could take photographic film. And they take the photographic film, negatives and film, and they throw it in a 55-gallon barrel. The barrel is filled with an aqueous solution, and then they had lab workers, quote-unquote lab workers, with canoe paddles. This is the Midwest, okay? So they're using canoe paddles, and they're stirring these 55-gallon barrels with film in it to extract out the silver from the film. Well, one day, two of the workers keeled over dead. Turns out that they weren't monitoring the pH of the barrels. They were using sodium cyanide to extract the silver. Cyanide is a well-known extraction method for silver and gold. And the pH got too low, so HCN outgassed out of the 55-gallon barrels, killed two workers. OSHA came to investigate, and guess what? They had never told the workers what they were doing. They just handed the workers canoe paddles and said, stir. They didn't warn them that it was sodium cyanide. They didn't tell them to monitor pH. So about 2 years later, the federal government passed a law called the Worker Right to Know Law. The Worker Right to Know Law is that if you are working at some location, you have a right to know what you're exposed to. What are the hazards of your workplace? Okay. That came about in 1986. Well, you fast forward to like 2006 at UCLA or UC Riverside, and guess what? All the grad students and postdocs would arrive, and they were never informed what the hazards were in the lab. So the LHAT is a system whereby the PIs are supposed to go in their lab and say, what type of hazard is present in my lab? What will my students be exposed to? And they do that assessment, and then part of the LHAT is tied then to PPE. So knowing what the hazards are, then we can say what type of PPE is required based on those hazards. Okay? So this paper-based form at UCLA was then converted to an online form, and so all the 10 UC campuses now suffer from this system that I helped create. And it basically accomplishes these types of things. It also does recording and documentation. So when Professor Heron, my colleague, was investigated by the district attorney said, Professor Heron, show me the documentation that you issued Sherry a lab coat. Show me the documentation that you trained her on using a lab coat. Professor Heron said, this is an academic institution. We just like talk to students. We don't document anything. So some of this then deals with the legal issues of making sure that workers have PPE, that they're trained on how to use it, and it's all recorded. Okay, one aspect of that I think, looking back on it, I criticize myself, is I don't think there's enough information about how to assess hazards. So basically, we created the LHAT and we said, well, faculty are smart people, they can come up with an assessment of hazards. But that's actually now becoming clear to me that it's not necessarily true. And so I think we need to go back and have an added information piece to help faculty doing the assessment part. But I'll just point out that the ACS Committee on Chemical Safety has thought about this. And so this document is available free online. It's about 120 pages-ish. And you can look at that. And it talks about assessing and evaluating and identifying hazards in laboratories. Another big change at UCLA was in the laboratory inspections. But what's really fun is that the internet is amazing because you can find all sorts of things that people probably don't want you to find. So you can go online and you can find the complete inspection checklist for UCLA from 2004, and this is it. One page, trivial little form, and that's this inspection form. Right? Well, since then we've changed it a lot. It's now an 8-page form covering a wide variety of topics. And as I said, the laboratory inspectors have research background, so they know what they're looking, they know what to look for. Very thorough inspections. A typical inspection takes about 2.5 hours of my labs. They're looking at a variety of things. And in particular, they're looking at critical things, at being extra highlighted to the lab workers and the PIs. So we don't just say, well, you know, this plug needs to be fixed. Oh, by the way, this chemical here is unsafe the way you're handling it. We categorize things into different types of violations. So there's critical violations, serious violations, non-serious violations. Critical violations have to be corrected immediately. The inspector will not leave the lab until that issue is corrected. The next type of violation requires a 48-hour reinspection. So the inspector will come back 48 hours later and say, did you fix this? If not, then I'm going to keep bothering you every 24 hours after that until you correct this safety issue. And then there's a 30-day reinspection. Part of this was because of when the OSHA inspected UCLA after the accident, they saw that there was an inspection report of Professor Herring's lab that was dated 2 or 3 months before the tragic accident, and nothing had been followed up on. There was no record that EHS had ever come back to follow up and see that anything was corrected. In fact, that was generally the case. So we changed our inspection protocols such that the inspectors come back to make sure everything's completed. And once things are completed, then there's a sign-off on the report. So that the inspection is not complete until everything is fixed. Okay? So that's done. Now, faculty, by and large, are great people. I'm a faculty person, and I'm just amazing. So most of us comply. But, you know, not everyone is 100% compliant. So we actually have some tools at UCLA that we have to put added pressure on PIs to make sure that they do take care of things. And so what happens is after 90 days of noncompliance, then EHS contacts my committee, and then my committee can start giving added pressure to the faculty member to make sure that they fix the violations so that the students have a safe work environment. And then we even have authority for the final punishment, and the final punishment for faculty is that we can call the facilities department. They come, they change the locks. So no students or faculty can get into the lab, and that certainly grabs people's attention, and they make sure everything's fixed. Okay, the inspection reports themselves are very detailed. This is one from my lab a couple of years ago, 2012. There's detailed information about the specific findings, what needs to be changed. They also have pictures, so like this is from our lab. It's like, yeah, maybe I should get rid of that model. Recommendations in the explanation of findings. So it's very detailed, it's very clear what the inspectors are expecting the lab to do to fix the problems in the laboratory. The safety inspection, so these are just lab inspections at UCLA. So 2007, 2008, we had about 1,000 inspections per year. And it turns out UCLA has about 900 wet labs. Okay, so there's 900 research groups that have wet labs. So there's about one per year. Now you can see that it ramped up to over 4,000 inspections per year of the labs. And so what they did is they categorized the labs. If your lab only works with brewing beer, then you're not going to be inspected that often. But if you're a lab like mine, where we work with lithium, potassium, sodium metal, carbon monoxide, arsenic, you name it, then our lab gets inspected 2 or 3 times a year. Okay, and then they have different categories of inspections, whether it's just a normal lab inspection or lasers or PPE, things like that. So a very active inspection program by our EHS office. Another thing they did was they added in unannounced PPE inspections. Because it turns out we're talking about trying to develop a culture of safety. But what is a culture of safety? One measure of the culture of safety is what people do when no one is looking. Okay. So if the boss is standing next to you and you're wearing your PPE, that's fine, right? But what we want to know is what happens on Saturday when the boss comes in and sees you in lab. Are you wearing your safety glasses? Are you wearing a lab coat? Are you doing things in a safe manner? That's what a true culture of safety is going to be. So to try and encourage this, our EHS instituted unannounced inspections. So the lab inspections are always scheduled. But here, these are unannounced. They would just show up at the door, say, okay, we're coming in, we want to see what you're wearing. And so the very first inspections were done with the chancellor of the university, the dean of physical sciences, and the director of EHS. So that was the level of importance that they put on these inspections. What were the findings? Maybe better than expected initially. So this is 2010. So they found that about 2/3 of the labs were compliant in terms of the PPE things that they're inspecting, but 1/3 were not compliant. If we look at the 1/3 that was not compliant, this is the breakdown of the topics. Some were things like lab coat or eye protection. Some were not directly PPE related, such as having food and drink in the lab. And even if you just take your empty Coke can from your office, if you dump it in the lab trash, that's a violation. Okay. This represented 255 inspections. So 255 inspections, 66% compliant. 2013, combination of 1276 and 62, so over 1,300 inspections. So 1,300 inspections, and we're 95% compliant. So remember at the beginning I said set expectations, and then people will follow. It's true. You set the expectations, people will do it. It's great. And so 95% compliance with that level. We can look at the non-compliance 5%, but if we look at the labs, the lab codes, sorry, which was cited by OSHA as being a causative factor in the death of the lab researcher, 3% of 5% are not wearing lab coats. So we have excellent compliance in wearing of laboratory coats. So that's good. Now, along the way, we've learned lots of things. And one of the things that I always like to say is that we need to have collaborations between EH&S and the science departments, because EH&S doesn't always have this technical expertise, and the science departments don't always know the rules and regulations of what they're supposed to do. One problem we had at UCLA was someone was bottling up some waste, and so instead of using these typical cheap glass containers, they said, oh, we've got these aluminum containers, and tell you what, well, let's just use these aluminum containers to bottle up the waste. It'll be great, because if you drop it, it doesn't break. Sounds great, okay? So they had a benzene spill, you dried the sodium metal, they quenched it at the end of the period, so first isopropanol, then methanol, then water, and then they put this all in the aluminum can. Okay, so we have an aluminum can containing benzene residues, water, and sodium hydroxide, okay? Then they labeled it up, gave it to EH&S, which took it away to the facility. 3 days later, it blew up. Okay, so any inorganic chemists in the room, what happened? What?
Metal-water reaction.
Metal-water reaction. You form hydrogen. Oops, wrong way. Come on. Yeah, hydrogen gas. So form hydrogen gas. So form hydrogen gas and blew up. So people initially didn't understand this, and so the chemists that know their inorganic chemistry can help this out. So it's important to have technical knowledge in avoiding accidents. I don't have a slide on it, but another very, very common explosion labs involving chemical waste is nitric acid. People will take nitric acid and then add in organic materials, and that will detonate after a period of time too. And the reason is that sulfuric acid is strong acid, hydrochloric acid is strong acid, nitric acid is a strong acid, but it's also an oxidizer. Very, very potent oxidizer. And so if you add in organic materials, then basically you have a bomb because you have oxygen and fuel. Another problem we had at UCLA was flammable safety cabinets like this. It turns out that the state of California passed a law 25 years ago saying that safety cabinets in the state of California have to be self-closing and actually self-latching too. Our H&S never inspected on that. So once the H&S learned about that requirement just like 4 years ago, they started inspecting on it and saying, okay, faculty, you have to replace all your cabinets to make sure that they're self-closing. The faculty started screaming, and so EH&S said, okay, let's do the collaboration. And so EH&S paid for retrofitting. So there are kits that you can retrofit these cabinets to make them self-closing. So I just want to say that you want to have a collaborative approach in solving problems. We'll have the department work with the H&S. Our H&S also is working on the PR campaign. So once or twice a year, they have a town hall to address people's concerns. The faculty response has also been dramatic. So the amount of changes to the requirements on faculty is dramatic. So we have to have training. So when I arrived at UCLA, they handed me the keys lab and an account number and said, go have fun. And I did. Now no faculty are allowed into their own labs until the faculty have safety training. And none of the students are allowed in either until that safety training. And then the faculty needs to take care of a number of other things regarding the operation of labs. The key point, though, is communicate responsibilities and set expectations for both faculty and the lab workers. So one day I was walking down the hallway, and I passed one of my colleagues and I said, hi, Dan, and he said, hi, Craig, and then he looked back at me and said, boy, I'm glad I'm a theoretical chemist. Student mentoring, okay, so this is faculty-student mentoring about 1,000 years ago. And you can see how attentive the students are. And then you fast forward 1,000 years, and it's the same. The students are still wearing leather sandals. But student mentoring 2015 can look like this in terms of requirements to document all the various safety activities, SOPs, a number of other features. So one of the things that we're trying to do at the UCOP level and also in the center is create tools that not only help the faculty but also help the lab researchers in their daily practices to have safe practices in the labs. Okay, so student mentoring, a lot of different things. In fact, they've changed so the training of PPE, safety training, documenting safety incidents, SOPs. We'll talk more about that. So SOP. So it turns out that there was no SOP for working with cubital lithium that Professor Heron had. So Sherry was verbally trained, and she had done the experiment before. She scaled up, and that's when she had the problem. There's no SOP. I also commented that many accidents have happened in chemistry labs because on scale up. Very well known, small scale is fine, even if there's an accident, no problem. And on scale up, there's many, many, many incidents. So in addition to process SOPs for dealing with things like cylinders and cryogenics and high and low pressure, things like that, the settlement agreement, but also law, required that we have SOPs for working with chemicals. Now, there's two approaches, and I think UCLA did the wrong approach. So at UCLA, we ended up writing SOPs for more than 1,000 chemicals. And the reason this is wrong is that no one in the lab is ever going to read 1,000 different documents. So what Berkeley did is they said, well, look, this is not ideal. Instead, they have banded SOPs. Because if you're working with potassium hydroxide or sodium hydroxide or cesium hydroxide, they're all the same thing. They can be the same band. So that's what the Berkeley approach was. So I think that's better. But actually, I still think the approach could be improved because it's all paper-based. And so we live in an earthquake country, and if the file cabinet falls over with 1,000 SOPs, then someone's going to get hurt. So we're working on a new system to have it be online so that you can update things rapidly. You can have the system-wide update of SOPs. You can have people train electronically, sign digitally, things like that. I think there's a lot of ways we can use technology to improve safety training. We're working on that. So the faculty have been more active in making sure their labs have good capabilities and good processes, and so nice, clean, shiny chemicals. So early on, we had a faculty meeting. So this is 2010, so 2 years after the accident, faculty meeting, and one of my colleagues said, safety is not our responsibility. We are here to be doing research. Each of us should be doing all of the necessary training. Okay? The person actually said that out loud. Fortunately, another professor who was more powerful said, you are completely wrong. The safety of our research students is our responsibility, and EHS does not have the technical knowledge. Okay? So this was a sort of a transformative event. It was at this point that the faculty realized, no, we really do have to take responsibility for this to make sure that we have students working safely in their labs. But ask a question, what is more important in establishing a culture of safety and preventing accidents? Is it lab compliance or faculty engagement? So, my apologies to Russ.
Faculty engagement.
Okay. So here is a common EHS view of safety. So there's compliance. And so compliance is things like writing down that you issued a lab coat, having written SOPs, writing down the date when you start the waste container, things like that. And then there's safety. Okay. And so the possibility of a high level of overlap. But faculty sort of have this view that there's a low level overlap, that many of the safety activities are more related to the legal requirements than actually keeping people safe in the lab. Okay? So we asked the question, well, what does keep people safe in the lab? Okay? So my center did a study. We looked at over 1,000 researchers and in a range of types of labs. Let me just show you the key data here. We asked about injuries. So this left graph is major injuries to the lab workers and minor injuries on this side. We just focus on the left side, major injuries. Are there 0 injuries in your lab, or 1 to 2, or 3 to 5 recently in your lab? And then we correlated it with the PI behavior. Does the faculty monitor lab safety? Do they occasionally check safety, or do they never check safety? Look at the blue bars. Blue bars go down. So for the PIs that monitor lab safety, there's very few labs that have lots of accidents. Most of the labs have 0 accidents. Look at the green bars going the opposite direction. the PI is not involved in monitoring safety in the lab, the number of major accidents are large. Okay? So these are over hundreds of different institutions, all with many different EH&S departments. So it's independent of what the EH&S is doing. What matters is that the faculty are engaged. The faculty are actively promoting safe practices in their lab. The faculty are setting expectations on the grad students and postdocs and undergrads. We also looked at lab coat usage, and it was the same. Now, a common question I get is, well, how do you get faculty engagement? Okay? Because the faculty are so busy. They're running 90 miles an hour as it is, trying to write grants, write papers, letter recommendation, teach classes, everything that we do. But we still have to worry about safety. Okay? So we need to set expectations. So chair of the departments, the deans, the EH&S, the chancellor should be setting expectations on what faculty need to be doing. But then you need to support and engage them. So that's critical that EH&S have the resources to support the faculty to do these activities. Empower them to solve problems and support innovation. And so that's one of the things we're working on, is trying to have digital tools to ease the safety load. Okay, grad student response. So here's a PPE party a couple years ago. They're actually doing lab clean out, but they got into wearing all their PPE. The student responses are great. When students initially arrive, they have the lab safety fundamentals course. They have the laboratory site safety orientation by the faculty member. All students are required to do fire extinguisher training in my department. Then there's laboratory specific training, and then research specific through EH&S if it's related to lasers, radiation, respirators, X-ray, etc. We have a course in my department, so safety in chemical and biochemical research, and so all chemistry grad students are required to take this course. And then there's annual retraining and ongoing lab-specific training. And I'll point out that EH&S is amazing, they're wonderful, but they don't know everything. And so it's important that every individual research group have lab-specific training, and you need to document that. Our laboratory inspectors actually look at our lab manual, and they make sure that each lab group is doing lab-specific training so that it's being discussed in research group meetings and other group activities. So that's an important part of the training. Here's the course for graduate students. I won't go through the details, but it covers everything from safety principles and work the right to know, all the way down to emergency first aid. So accidents happen, shit happens. So what do you do if your lab mate's injured? What happens if you walk in the lab and they're on the floor and they're unconscious? Does everyone know first aid? So it's something to consider adding to your training. What's been the response? The response has been tremendous. Okay, so we set requirements on them for training, expectations for PPE, responsibilities, because after all, the students are the front line for the implementation. The faculty can talk to their blue in the face, or in my case, red in the face, but it's the students who are in the lab who are doing lab work. They need to be safe, so they're the front line. The outcome at UCLA has been great. They changed their behavior regarding personal clothing. People wear, guess what, long pants and closed-toed shoes. They wear their PPE, and they've changed their attitudes about safety. Okay? And they have active roles as laboratory safety officers. So every single research group, in addition to having the students and the faculty member, every group must have a laboratory safety officer. And when EH&S comes to inspect the labs, they connect with both the PI and the laboratory safety officer. And so that each group has a student representative to meet with the EH&S. I think that helps in the communication. Even at the undergraduate level, we have the same expectations. So here are our undergraduate labs. This is actually a freshman lab. They're required to wear lab coats at all times, and we even mandated now that they wear the blue FR coats. In this case, all the students are required to buy the blue FR coats. This is before class started, so they're not wearing safety glasses, but when they're actively working, they're wearing safety glasses too. Okay, but before we congratulate ourselves, how are we doing? There's some key challenges to safety. Okay, so a lot of what I've been talking about is sort of the basic stuff, meeting the regulatory requirements of training, documentation, PPE, lab practices. Okay, but what I want to do is bump it up a level, and that means making informed risk assessments. Okay, you need to be able to identify what the hazards are in your lab, and also you need to be able to predict unknown hazards. You need to be able to set procedures and policies in place and activities in place to try and protect against those accidents. And then you need to make sure that you ensure lab protocols are followed based on the risk assessments. So UCLA, April 2014, grad student was using this pressure bomb here. This is about a foot tall and 3 or 4 inches in diameter. He was heating dicyclophenadiene to convert the dimeric material into an oligomeric material like pentacyclophenadiene. He was using this oven. This is a photograph literally days before the accident. He had done this experiment 12 times before. On the 13th time, he put it in the oven, and an hour later, he noticed the temperature was increasing much more rapidly than it ever had previously. He opened the oven door, and it detonated. This is the oven before. This is the oven. Okay, right here is the oven after the accident. The pressure vessel blew apart, and it basically went up and down. So this part went through the floor, and the cap went through the ceiling. Okay? Had it been oriented a little bit differently, the student could have been killed. The blast was so violent. It turns out that a number of things were done wrong, but one of the key changes was that in this 13th experiment, the student had placed the pressure vessel directly over a heating element. Previous tests, they'd set it between the heating elements. But if you've ever held your hand over a match or a lighter, direct heating can be much, much hotter. And so that's what happened here. You got direct heating that heated it much hotter and led to the explosion. So it turns out that in the manufacturer's product guide for dicyclophenadiene, it says high temperatures induce explosive formation of gases from the decomposition of the dicyclophenadiene. They had not paid attention to the written material. The student was working with a high pressure, high temperature apparatus, but there was no written SOP for this. The reactor was operating at elevated pressures, but guess what? There was no pressure relief valve. There's no burst valve on this apparatus. So the only way it could burst was by the vessel itself failing. And then it also turns out that the student admitted previous occasions of quenching the pressure vessel by plunging it into a water bath to cool it down. And so for those of you who know about metallurgy, you completely change the properties of a metal by heating it up and then rapidly cooling it down. So that might have led to the problem here. Conclusion, known hazards. Okay, this is not new science. No new principles were discovered in this accident. These are known hazards. Iowa State University, June of this year, materials chemistry lab. They were doing research on using a ball mill. Ball mill is basically where you take a steel vessel with steel ball bearings in it, you put some chemicals in, and you shake it up for 20 hours. Okay, you get finely divided material. They conducted this experiment many times using an aluminum manganese powder and 300 atmospheres of hydrogen gas. They did a new experiment. They added in a little bit of vitriol XF as an inert non-flammable solvent. This is basically decafluoropentane. So there's a couple protons, but decafluoropentane. So basically it's a fluorinated hydrocarbon. Okay? 40 minutes into a 20-hour run, there's catastrophic vessel failure that destroyed the pressure vessel and the fume hood. Fortunately, no one was injured in this incident. Okay? This is a thermite reaction. So it turns out that from the product information from the MSDS, it said incompatible materials, alkali metal, blah, 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 powdered metal. And what are they making in the ball mill? They're making powdered metals. Okay? And it turns out that it's actually a known explosive. Our military uses on a regular basis a mixture of aluminum powder and Teflon powders. Everyone thinks that Teflon is inert. It's not. Teflon powder and aluminum powder is a great explosive. Okay. In addition, the pressure vessel was operating at 300 atmospheres, but guess what? There was no pressure relief valve. So once again, an academic lab that doesn't have the right controls, and there's no pressure relief valve. In industry, this has never happened because there's engineers associated with any pressure experiments. So unfortunately, known hazards, not new science. Berkeley, March 2015. The student synthesized a diazonium perchlorate. Okay? Diazonium is an organic compound. So all you need to know about organic compounds is you put it in your car to drive to work, right? It's fuel. Perchlorate is a super, super great oxidizer. So you have a mixture of fuel and oxidizer. And a particular property of perchlorate compounds is that they're shock sensitive. I made perchlorate explosives 41 years ago when I was 14 years old. The student was scraping the material with a metal spatula and it detonated. Okay? Well, if you think about it, you might have a metal spatula and you're putting 1 pound of pressure on it. But what's the surface area on the edge of a lab spatula? The surface area is probably like maybe a couple hundred microns. So a couple hundred microns with 8 pounds of pressure is actually lots of PSI overall. So the material is detonated. The student was wearing regular glasses, not safety glasses. They shattered, both lenses shattered, and the glass fragments from the left lens went into the student's eye. So the student's having to have work done on his left eye. So it was good. He's wearing a lab coat, but bad. He prepared an obvious explosive. He had increased the scale of the synthesis. He'd used metal spatula, although I think any spatula would be bad. Regular glasses, not safety glasses. No face shield, no blast shield. So here's blast shields. Here's a guy in a safety shield. You wonder why safety is not sexy. Look at this guy. So unfortunately, once again, no hazards, not new science. Accident at UCLA, April 2015. A graduate student was doing biological research. So bio work is totally safe, right? You don't need to wear PPE when you're doing bio work, right? So the student was not wearing safety glasses, and he was working in a biosafety cabinet, okay? And he had a plastic tube, I think a centrifuge tube, and he was cutting the end of the centrifuge tube off using a disposable scalpel. But what's a disposable scalpel? Basically, it's a plastic handle with a razor blade glued onto it. This pressing hard on the disposable scalpel to cut the hard plastic tube, and guess what? Swing! The razor blade popped off, bounced off the bench, and impaled the student's left eye, right through the lens. The student will have to have a lens replacement surgery. Fortunately, medical doctors are pretty good. He'll fully recover, but it should not have happened. What was most appalling to me is, guess what? The professor argued with me, saying, "Oh no, we're a bio lab. We don't need to wear safety glasses." But we're meeting because you just had a student lose an eye, and you're arguing with me that we don't need safety glasses? This is insane. So it turns out that he said, well, you know, this is a freak accident. Freak accident. Well, freak accident, maybe not. So you just do a Google search. Google search X-Acto knife eye injury. So everyone knows what an X-Acto knife is. It's about this size. It's solid metal. It's not disposable. And then it's got the triangular blade on it, this wicked sharp. Okay, just do that Google search. It turns out people have been pressing on X-Acto knives. They break, and that sharp triangular thing straight through people's eyes. Okay, so moral of the story is anytime you're doing cutting, you should be wearing eye protection when cutting. Okay? That's a well-established protocol. So good thing is wearing a lab coat. The hood sash is pulled partway down, but no safety glasses, using a fragile tool to cut hard plastic. And also there are other things that are similar to what happened here at UC Riverside. The people involved had not notified the department leadership, and they had not notified the HSS within 8 hours. Turns out we have posters all over UCLA saying, if you have an accident, you need to notify HSS within 8 hours, okay? But for some reason, the professor said, well, you know, whatever, I was busy, okay? But the accident, known hazards, not known science, not new science. Accident, Riverside, we won't talk about that. Okay, so safety accidents. So can we learn from accidents and try and improve our safety practices? So we're trying to look at things like that. You know, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? Where did they occur? Why did they occur? So here is data from my department. So here's 11 years of data of all reported accidents. So if someone in my lab cuts their finger and they put a Band-Aid on it, it's not reported. But if they lacerate their finger and they go get a stitch, or they just go to the ER and the ER says, Band-Aid's okay. If they go to ER or the student health center, then it's a reported incident, okay? We can see that it's a statistics of small numbers, okay? We only have maybe 3 to 13 incidents per year, and we're a department with 300 grad students, 100 postdocs, 100 undergraduate researchers, and 50 faculty. So having a couple incidents is very low, okay? But what we can do is by looking at the data, we can look at the red lab accidents and the blue non-lab accidents, so carpal tunnel syndrome, falling down while walking on level, feeding the animals while at lunch. But what you see is over here, these two numbers here, lacerations 18, chemical exposure 16. So the most common accident in our department is actually chemical exposures and laceration. So maybe if we change our training and have better safety training on those activities, it actually might have some spillover effect and improve the safety in other areas. And you can see thermal burns is 5. So over an 11-year period, we only had 5 thermal burns, but unfortunately 1 was fatal. How are we doing? Our lab-specific accident rate is about 0.8. So that means that of every 100 people per year, we have about less than 1 person have an accident. Our overall accident rate, including things like carpal tunnel syndrome and stress, 1.7. UCLA, about 1.5 and 3.6. But how do we compare to the world? So it turns out for the state of California, you can get the data for all industries, including state and local governments. The accident rate is about 4%. So that's all types of accidents. So accidents, carpal tunnel syndrome, back problems, emotional stress, a variety of things. Colleges and universities, 2.9. Manufacturing, 3.2. Chemical manufacturing, 2.8. So we're in the ballpark, but that's probably the wrong way to look at it. You don't want to say we're as bad as everyone else. You want to be better than everyone else. So that's what we want to try and achieve. So at UCLA, we looked at all accidents. So there's 1,366 accidents in 2013, but that includes everything. So that's grounds workers, cooks, chefs, you name it. We separated it out, and these are the lab accidents at UCLA over the last 7 years. Okay, and so the good is it's low incidence. The bad is maybe we're not changing that much. So 2008 was the terrible accident, but even 2012, 2013, 2014, we have similar numbers of accidents. So maybe if we do further analysis of it, we can improve on things. And so this gets back to the idea of maybe we're compliant with all the regulations, but we need to still improve safety by going beyond that. So these are the types of lab accidents: chemical exposure, biohazard exposure, animal bites, scratches, lacerations, other lacerations due to glassware and knives and things, strain, contusions. Okay, so by possibly analyzing this, we can get more information. We also broke it down by department, and it's like, one department, the Division of Lab Animal Medicine, represented 39% of all reported accidents at UCLA. It turns out that we have a huge medical school, a huge medical enterprise, and they use lots of animals in research. And 39% of all our accidents are coming from the people who work with these animals. Okay, so we decided to look at if we could change things, and the results were actually great. So when we looked at chemical exposure, biohazard exposure, lacerations, those types of accidents, over time, not much change. But look at animal bites and scratches. Dramatic decrease in animal bites and scratches. So we talked with the director of that program. We said, well, what did you do different? He said, well, I was hired in 2011, and when I came in, I completely changed the protocols. And rather than having just basic safety training and then move on and throw people in with the animals, they actually have proficiency-based training. So that the workers are not allowed to graduate until they demonstrate proficiency in working with animals to avoid bites, scratches, lacerations. And you can see the beneficial effect. Okay, so good training that had a serious impact on reducing those incidents. Chemical exposures, splash to body, splash to eyes, inhalation. We think that these are also going to be preventable through better safety training, but also the new coats I talked about. I think with new coats that will help reduce exposures due to splashes to the body. Chemistry is actually not the major culprit on campus, but actually pathology. Okay, so I'll be proud that in chemistry we're doing great, and we need to educate some of the other areas. Biohazard exposures largely due to lacerations. One of the things that our H&S office does is when they inspect for labs, they actually look at the glassware. So I had a graduated cylinder. So the graduated cylinder was maybe 25 centimeters tall, and the top was broken, but all the graduated part was fine. So my students were still using it. And the H&S came in and said, well, no, you can't do that. The reason is you have broken glass that represents a laceration hazard. So you either need to fix the glassware by fire polishing it or replace it. And so that's the level of detail that our inspectors are looking at. Cruise through some of this. Causes of lacerations. Guess what? Scalpel razor blade is a major cause of laceration. And again, this is a trainable solution where you can reduce the incidence by having training. It turns out that a common technique when working with either dead or live animals is you pin them down to a board, and then they might cut into the abdomen. Now, it turns out that the skin is kind of floppy, so what researchers do is they take their finger and they stretch the skin, and then they use a scalpel and cut. You can guess what happens. Okay? So all you do is you train. You say, well, look, do it this way. Have your thumb pull up and then cut down. Trivial. So easy to do. Turns out, anyone know what the most common cause for ER visits on Sunday morning is? So out in this town of Riverside, ER visits on Sunday morning. What's the major cause? Mike?
Waffles.
No. Close. Bagels. Bagels. People take bagels, they're holding the bagel, and they cut the bagel, and guess what they end up cutting to? So training can help out. I've gone over time, so let me just conclude. Safety is a lot like exercise. Thinking about it once a month or once a year is not enough. You need to think about safety on a daily basis. There's no magic bullet, okay? So there's no one single thing that's going to solve it. You need to have a multi-pronged approach with lots of people involved. Engagement by faculty is the most effective action with a documented impact on safety. Active participation by the faculty reduces injuries and promotes a culture of safety. And then finally, setting expectations at all institutional levels. Everyone has to have expectations on them to promote safety. So I conclude with two last slides. Many people say, think safety, and you can even buy signs that says, think, safety begins with you. But what does it mean? What are you supposed to do when your PI says, think safety? Well, you can break it down to three questions. What could go wrong? Okay, analyze what you do and say, what could go wrong? Then the second question, how can I prevent it? How can you do something differently? How can you change something to prevent the accident? And the third thing is, how can I prepare for the unexpected? Okay, what can you do to make your lab prepared in the event of an unexpected accident? Does anyone know what tomorrow is?
Great American Shakeout.
Right, tomorrow's the Great American Shakeout. So at 10:15 tomorrow, everyone's supposed to think about having an earthquake. So has your lab discussed what you should do in the event of a major earthquake? Suppose you're working at the hood. Should you drop and duck and cover, or should you like move away from all the falling chemicals and glassware? Your stills, do you have water shutoff valves? Do you have power shutoff valves on your stills if the water goes out to them because of an earthquake? So go back to your labs and think about what would you do tomorrow if at 10:15 a real earthquake actually did occur. I want to thank my collaborators at the UC Center for Laboratory Safety and some of the other people that support my operation. But most I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to come talk today about safety practices. Thank you.